today we're going to be asking the question of what is common between research and practice? What are the connections between doing a particular research methodology and doing things like psychotherapy? So, okay, we're going to take a look at the overview. We're going to be taking a look at action research in particular. We're going to take a look at psychotherapy. We're going to find the sort of Venn diagramic overlap between the two, talk about what the research question is, and talk about the implications of this research. Actually, as of yesterday, it's officially been funded by SHIRT, which is good news. Thank you to my supervisor for rephrasing it. Nice ways, yeah. Okay, so action research. Action research follows along the post-structuralist way of perceiving the world. So what that means is it opens itself up to various perspectives. It's not about truth-seeking per se as much as it is about people coming together to create ways of looking at things in various perspectives. Touches upon the issue of pluralism, which are often go hand in hand. Next, we take a look at action research being not so much a fixed methodology, again following along post-structuralist thinking, but rather an attitude, a sort of perspective, a way of relating to research as an unfolding process of people coming together to solve particular issues in the world. Action research itself was created to solve problems. The researcher joins a community of individuals. Those individuals have particular needs and problems. And by joining with them, they bring their expertise, and they join in on the lived experience that is the people's expertise. And in coming together and joining hands, we create new knowledge and then solve the issues of the world. Related to that is the participatory perspective. Participatory meaning we actually do everything together. So we flatten the hierarchy between the researcher and the researched as much as possible. The power dynamics become shared and equal to whatever extent that's humanly possible. Participatory in the sense that we allow the participants to influence the direction of the study. We are curious about how they can change the course and shape of how we look at a particular issue. And lastly, it's about monism. Monism is de-dichotomizing the world, de-dichotomizing research and practice, de-dichotomizing theory and practice, de-dichotomizing our perspectives of what researchers are and what the researched are. In fact, moving forward, we'll touch upon it in the next slide. Moving forward, this is a way of perceiving action research. This is not action research. There is no action research. It's a means of doing research. It's an attitude, right? So, but here we can take a look at it. So we plan, we act, we observe, we reflect, always in tandem with the participants with whom we work, right? Everything we do is with the people that we're playing the game with, playing the research game with. So about that topic of the researcher and the researched, everything's collaborative. It's co-research. It's taking a look at what are we doing together? What kind of questions can we ask together? How can we join hands in solving a particular issue? So the endless amount of C's in this sort of point to the doing research with, by, and for people, not doing research on people. We're not applying a method on people. We're creating new methods. We're creating new knowledge. Okay? Boom. Psychotherapy. So, psychotherapy. What is common between research and psychotherapy? Good question. I don't know if any of you have heard this thing said, but the common factors approach is a pretty big deal these days in psychotherapy research. First suggested by Saul Rosenzweig in 1936, so 80 years later, we're still following along with this idea. Common factors in the Dodebert verdict are the same thing. And the reason it's called the Dodebert verdict, and I'll explain what it is in a second, is Rosenzweig cited Lewis Carroll in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The sort of quote of Dodebert saying, "Everybody has won and all shall have prizes." And what that says is, if you do therapy diligently and consistently and ethically, then no matter which approach you take, so CBT, TBT, narrative, humanist, existential, blah blah blah, all of those are equally valid and all of those are equally efficacious. Mind blown. Right, so like how does that work in the sense of us doing therapy. What do? Do we then just like flip a coin and then pick a particular therapy and then just go with it? Like, how does that work? So what's been suggested is that we find amongst all the approaches, there must be common factors. There must be something that they all share, underlying, the sort of models and techniques and that surface level stuff that we tend to believe is how therapy works. And here they are. There's been many factors suggested. These four are helpful because they help us make sense of it in a visual way, and we'll see it in the next slide. You got a little preview there. So client and extra therapeutic factors. So take a look at it this way. So I'm a therapist. In this particular scenario, I'm a therapist. The client comes in, right? I do my stuff. I do my therapy gig. The therapist joins in with the client, and the client has their own life history. They have their own readiness to change. They have their own strengths, assets. They have the particular history of what happened to them 5 weeks ago, 5 days ago. What are they thinking about that particular moment? What kind of assets do they have in terms of material wealth? What kind of assets do they have in terms of their social networks? All that stuff is crucial to what happens in therapy. It's not separate from the therapy process, right? That makes up 40% of outcome variance. A substantial piece of the puzzle is stuff that we have no control over as therapists. Mind blown. Next, when compared to doing only like models and techniques and extra therapeutic factors like client characteristics, 80% of the outcome variance is determined by that latter half of the conversation. Okay? So, moving forward. Placebo and expectancy, that's sort of the regression towards the mean. You might have heard that term, is that people will get better just because they will get better. That's sort of how things often work. There's also expectancy, so going to therapy is in and of itself therapeutic without there being anything else done, right? Techniques and models, which is that fun stuff that we often attribute to change, right? So if we get the technique right, if we get the model right, if we find the right way of treating that particular domain or issue or whatever, actually makes up only 15% of outcome variance, right? Well, then we move on to relationships. Relationships there's been over 1,000 studies that have found that relationships are essential and crucial to success in therapy. 30% of outcome variance, 20 depending on the study, 26 to 30% of outcome variance is attributable to the relationship. And when compared to techniques and models, it's 5 to 7 times, makes up 5 to 7 times the outcome variance. So this is sort of it, right? What are we looking at in terms of therapy? We're going to be focusing on the relationships here in particular. The overlap that we see between action research and therapy is this sort of coming togetherness, the collaborative piece, is that agreement, that ongoing process of what are we doing together in this therapy gig, and an action research is what are we doing together in this research gig. So it's all shared between the relationship. Without the relationship, you don't have action research. Without the relationships, you don't have therapy. You have stale models of how things ought to be. But then you add this relational piece, this collaboration piece, this what are we doing this how are we doing this, right? And you get the overlap. In fact, in recent years, we've seen certain therapy domains, certain therapy approaches actually focus specifically on collaboration and on the relationship as a whole. In fact, everything else is extraneous. It's what are we doing as people coming together. Social therapy, based out of New York, collaborative therapy, based out of somewhere in the States, and narrative therapy, well, there's actually a strong community here of narrative therapists in Calgary, for example. So this is a way of really just taking a look at what I'm talking about. This is not a linear path analysis in any way, shape, or form. It could be maybe at some point in time if you want to look at it that way. But this is just to give you a sense of what's the conversation about. So action research requires the working alliance, which is another word for the therapeutic relationship or the therapeutic alliance, right? It requires collaboration. Professional practice for therapists requires collaboration and the working alliance or the therapeutic relationship. So they have that shared between them. Fair? Fair game? Okay. So the question that we're asking is, counseling psychology students like myself who are exposed to action research, who get to get their hands dirty in doing action research in their graduate level training, does that in any way transfer over into how they then subsequently do therapy, how they do any professional practice, right? Let's take a look at that again. So in doing action research and training to do action research in our, like for example, our qualitative methodology class, do we then, as professionals in the field, do therapy differently? Or how does that connect, right? Okay. The way that we, in counseling psychology, learn how to do relationships is, for example, we come in having had to do a micro skills course. For example, differentiating between summaries, reflects, paraphrases, or open questions and closed questions, right? So it's sort of dissecting the conversation thing into like nameable pieces and then learning how to, look at them that way. It doesn't really transfer over into how to do relationships, but it gives us a helpful beginning. We then have a working alliance course in our first semester in the graduate program, which then again helps sort of build that how do we do relationships thing. Then we have practica, and we have hours and hours of supervision that help us ascertain how to do relationships. So the big question is, what else is there, and is action research one of those things? Now the methodology that we'll be using to study this phenomenon is action research. It makes sense in a way to do action research about action research. It kind of fits. So the action researchy piece is, as you'll see later on, is in terms of when we have the participants with us, when we're actually giving them the survey or the semi-structured interview, it's also giving them a space to say, what do you think about what we're doing? Do you have any suggestions? Do you have any ways that we can alter the direction of the study in a way that makes sense to you as a person who's had this lived experience? Do you want to join in on being a co-researcher? How does that look? Right? So it's that openness and curiosity and inquisitiveness that makes up action research. Now, the actual outcome that we're looking for is a document, a consolidated story about the connection of having learned action research and the life that these people now live as therapists, counselors, psychologists. And we'll be recruiting them through the Who Do You Know methodology, snowball sampling. Implications. This is an untapped niche in the sense that people don't often look at the connection between what we actually do in doing research and how does that transfer over into our life. In terms of counseling pedagogy, if we do find a connection in the stories that we build from the people who have gone through this experience, then do we then need to rethink how counseling programs are, for example, set up? For example, or not for example, importantly, relationships, doing relationships is a core competency to become a psychologist in Alberta. Like, you literally cannot become a psychologist if you don't know how to do relationships. It's that important. And so if we're finding new ways of building that competency, for example, through the doing of a particular way of research, do we then add more of these courses? I don't know. Do we then add more of a focus on alternative methods of building relationships? I don't know. But these are all emerging questions that we can begin to ask. And lastly is the question about research methodology. Action research, as we started off with, is a way of changing the world. In doing action research, you transform the world that you're in joining together with people, in building new knowledge, and then shaping how it all looks. And as a process of doing that, you then potentially, we'll see, change yourself and the therapy that you do and the way you relate to other human beings. What we're looking at is, in a sense, a revolutionary way of doing science, a transformative way, a way that does not leave the world in the same way that it did when we first started off. And that's an untapped niche, and that's something that we're going to be taking a look at. There's a whole bunch of references that you may or may not be interested in, and we have time for questions.